There's something deeply unsettling about old houses. Maybe it's the way the floorboards creak when no one's walking, or the way light filters through aged curtains, casting crooked shadows. For Mark and Elise Donovan, the old house on Birchwood Lane was meant to be a new beginning, a quiet place for Mark to recover after stepping away from his high-pressure career in finance. Elise, a ceramic artist, fell in love with the wide windows and overgrown garden. It was peaceful, unassuming, perfect. 3 weeks in, Elise noticed the stain. It was a dark, reddish blotch on the hallway wall near the stairs. At first glance, it looked like dried wine. "Mark, did you spill something here?" she asked one morning, pointing at it with a frown. He shook his head. "Nope, wasn't me. Maybe the previous owners." She tried scrubbing it with warm water and baking soda. Nothing. Bleach barely faded it. Mark joked, "It's probably just haunted. House stains are like tattoos, permanent." But something about the way the stain returned, slightly darker each morning, unsettled Elise. They began to argue. Mark insisted it was in her head, the stress of the move, maybe a trick of the light. Elise, usually calm, began waking in the middle of the night, staring at the stain, convinced it was changing shape. "I swear it looks like a face," she whispered one night, shivering. Mark looked, saw nothing unusual. "Babe, you're overworked. Come back to bed." Then came the smell, faint at first, like rust, metallic. Elise gagged whenever she passed the stairs. Guests mentioned it too. "You got plumbing issues?" asked their friend Derek. "Smells like old blood in here." Mark laughed it off, but Elise didn't. She started having dreams. Dark corridors, a woman sobbing behind walls, shadows moving just out of reach. Elise began researching the house. The library's microfilm archives told a forgotten story. In 1956, a woman named Margaret Elms disappeared from that very house. Her husband claimed she left him. Neighbours whispered she'd gone mad. The stain, Elise realised, had appeared not long after. One article even mentioned police examining a strange discoloration on the walls. Mark didn't believe it. "We're not tearing up our walls because of some ancient gossip." But Elise wouldn't let it go. She started marking the stain's borders every day with pencil. Within 2 weeks, it had spread, slowly, subtly, but undeniably. "It's growing, Mark. It's alive." His silence said everything. Even he couldn't deny it now. One night, Mark stayed up after Elise had gone to bed. He poured himself a drink and sat by the hallway, eyes on the stain. He didn't want to believe it either. But as the clock struck 2:37 a.m., he saw it move. It pulsed. He dropped his glass, shards scattered. His breath caught in his throat. From within the stain, something pressed out, like hands. Human hands, struggling against a thin membrane, and then, gone. Mark didn't sleep that night. They called a specialist, a contractor, a priest. The contractor left mid-inspection. Whatever that is, it's not in the paint. The priest blessed the home. As he passed the hallway, he stopped. "You should leave," he whispered, placing a shaking hand on Mark's shoulder. "But what is it?" Elise asked. He didn't answer. He only walked out, fast. They decided to paint over the stain. 3 layers of heavy primer, new wallpaper. For 2 days, it worked. On the 3rd morning, it was back. Bigger. Now it stretched from floor to ceiling. A full silhouette. Feminine. hair flowing like water, eyes wide and empty. Elise collapsed. They moved into the guest room, locked the hallway door, avoided it. But the dreams worsened. Elise stopped eating. Mark heard weeping from behind the walls. One night, Elise disappeared. Mark woke up to silence. Her side of the bed, cold. He found her standing by the stain, hand pressed to its center. "She's not angry anymore," Elise said, eyes vacant. "She just wants to come home." Elise was never the same. She spoke less, smiled at nothing, spent hours in front of the stain. Mark tried to intervene once, pull her away, but the wall rippled. A low hum filled the house. That night, he dreamt of drowning in blood, of hands pulling him into the wall. Mark left the house. He packed a single bag and drove without looking back. He called Elise's family, told them she refused to leave. But a week later, a package arrived at his motel. Inside, a piece of the hallway wallpaper, the stain, somehow transferred, still growing. On the back, a note in Elise's handwriting. "She says you left her, but she knows where you sleep." They say some things find you when you're most vulnerable. For Natalie, it was after her divorce, when she moved into a small rental cottage just outside Asheville, North Carolina. It was cheap, a bit run down, but quiet. Exactly what she thought she needed to put the pieces of her life back together. The landlady, a kind older woman named Mrs. Harrow, gave her a warm smile and a key with a wooden tag. "Just ignore the stain in the attic," she said casually. "It's old, harmless, been there since the 70s. Natalie didn't think much of it. She was tired, emotionally drained, and the attic wasn't even part of her living space. But the first night she slept there, she dreamt of water dripping, slow, rhythmic, echoing in a pitch-black room. She woke up with her heart pounding, swearing she heard footsteps just above her bedroom ceiling. 3 days later, curiosity got the better of her. She climbed the creaky pull-down attic stairs, flashlight in hand. The air was dry but stale, and there was dust thick enough to choke. And there it was, the stain, not large, not sinister, just a dark, round blotch in the far corner. But it wasn't on the floor. It was on the wall, almost level with her eyes. The strange part was, it shimmered when her flashlight moved across it, as if it was slightly wet. She reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, she gasped. It was ice cold. But more than that, it pulled at her, like her skin wanted to stay attached. She yanked her hand back and stumbled down the stairs. For the rest of the evening, her fingertips tingled. That night she heard breathing. Not hers. Heavy, wet breathing, just above her ceiling. The next day, she asked Mrs. Harrow about the stain. The woman paused, her eyes darting to the floor. "It's from before my time," she muttered. "The last tenant covered it with a painting. After what happened, we left it uncovered. Thought maybe it would stop." "Stop what?" Natalie asked, but Mrs. Harrow only shook her head and mumbled something about paying rent on time. Natalie started documenting the stain. Every day, she took a photo. At first, nothing changed. But then, 10 days in, she noticed something horrifying. The shape had altered slightly. It was no longer round. It had an edge, a profile. It looked like a jawline. The next day, it had what appeared to be an eye. She began hearing whispers, not words, just sounds that felt close. Sometimes at 3 a.m., sometimes when she washed dishes. It wasn't in her head. She knew it. And worst of all, the stain was growing. now stretching across 2 panels of the attic wall and darker than ever. One evening, as she reviewed her photo log, she realized something sickening. The stain wasn't just forming a face, it was forming her face. She stared at the latest image for a long time. The curve of the chin, the arch of the eyebrows. It was unmistakable. Panic gripped her chest. She climbed into the attic to see it herself. But when she shone the flashlight at the wall, the stain was gone. She backed up in disbelief, only to hear a whisper inches from her ear. "Behind you." She ran, out of the attic, out of the cottage, barefoot into the street. Neighbours saw her that night, pale and shaking, wrapped in a blanket. But the police found nothing in the attic. No stain, no sounds, just dust. Natalie checked into a motel and tried to move on. She called movers to retrieve her things, but they refused. "Your place gives us the creeps," one of them texted. "Something's wrong with the walls." She returned one last time during daylight, determined to grab her journals and grandmother's ring. When she opened the door, the house was dark, despite the noon sun. The windows looked tinted. Inside, the air was heavy. As she stepped in, her foot hit something soft. A rug had been pulled across the floor by something. She didn't call out, didn't breathe. She stepped around it and moved toward the attic stairs, but froze. The stain was no longer up there. It had moved. It was now on the living room wall. A perfect outline of her face, mouth open in a silent scream. Natalie moved back to the motel. She doesn't work, doesn't sleep much, but she writes and draws. Over and over, she sketches that face. Not her face anymore, though. It changes a little each day. Yesterday, it had Mrs. Harrow's eyes. Old houses have stories, they say, but some stories are better left untold. That thought echoed in Emma's mind as she stood before the crumbling 2-story cottage nestled deep in the Catskills. It had once belonged to her grandmother, a woman she hadn't seen in 20 years. When the call came that the property was hers, Emma didn't hesitate. She needed a break from the city, from the endless noise, the failed relationships, the burnout. A quiet escape. But the moment she stepped out of the car and looked up at the house, something inside her recoiled. It wasn't the peeling paint or broken shutters, it was the window on the 2nd floor. She could have sworn something moved behind it. A curtain? A shadow? She shook her head. "Just nerves," she muttered. Still, the air felt heavier here. Inside, the house was eerily preserved, as though her grandmother had just stepped out. Dust coated everything, but nothing was disturbed. No cobwebs, no mice. The first thing Emma noticed, though, was the mark on the wall of the dining room. A long, jagged stain running from the ceiling down to the wooden floor, almost like something had bled through the walls. She tried to clean it, scrubbing until her hands ached, but it stayed. No smell, no moisture, just a dark maroon discoloration that seemed to throb under the dim light. That night, while unpacking, Emma kept glancing back at it. At one point, it seemed darker than before. She laughed it off, but deep inside, something stirred. A feeling she couldn't quite explain. The first night was the worst. The silence of the forest was so complete, it made the creaks of the house sound deafening. Around 2 a.m., Emma woke to a strange tapping sound. At first, she thought it was from outside, maybe a branch brushing against the siding. But then she realized it was coming from the wall, from inside the wall. She sat up, holding her breath. The tapping stopped, then came a whisper, low, urgent, unintelligible. It seeped out of the wall like smoke. Emma jumped out of bed, turned on every light, and searched the house. Nothing, except the stain. It had widened. It now reached across the ceiling. The next morning, Emma explored the attic, hoping to find old photographs or letters, anything that could explain her grandmother's life here. In a wooden chest, she found a stack of journals. Most of them were blank, but the last one had a single entry. "It watches when I sleep. I tried to paint over it. It came back stronger." Emma sat frozen, the journal trembling in her hand. She flipped through more pages, drawings, erratic scribbles, and over one phrase, "It feeds on regret." She dropped the journal and backed away. That evening, when she walked past the dining room, the stain was now halfway across the floorboards. A sickly warmth radiated from it. Days passed strangely. Emma would wake up at odd hours, sometimes fully clothed, standing in different rooms, unsure how she got there. Her phone no longer held signal. Clocks would stop. Food spoiled within hours. One night, she found herself humming an unfamiliar tune while staring at the stain. Her hand was pressed against it. She screamed and stumbled back. The wall was warm, almost feverish. But the worst part, her fingers left no smudge. It had accepted her touch. That night, the whispering returned, louder. Not one voice now, but many, crying, laughing, pleading, all coming from inside the walls. Emma drove into town the next morning, desperate for answers. An old woman at the general store recognized her surname and stepped back in alarm. "That house. Your grandmother locked herself in there for the last decade, wouldn't let no one in. Said the house remembered things." When Emma mentioned the stain, the woman paled. "My sister cleaned that house once. Said it had a smell like iron, and the walls." They whispered her name. She was never the same after. Emma tried to ask more, but the woman simply walked away. Back at the cottage, the power flickered constantly. The stain had now spread beyond the dining room, into the hallway, the kitchen. Emma couldn't bring herself to touch it again, but it seemed to pulse with her every step. The air inside the house smelled like rot and rust. She started hearing her name spoken in voices she recognized. Her mother's, her ex-boyfriend's, even her own voice. The stain began to take shape, forming outlines like faces trapped in the wall, screaming without sound. Emma sobbed as she watched it expand, helpless to stop it. One morning, Emma woke to find the entire living room covered in the same dark hue. Every wall, the ceiling, even the floor, swallowed by the stain. She didn't run, couldn't. Her body felt heavy, her thoughts muddy. She stared into the stain for hours, and somewhere inside, she saw her grandmother's eyes staring back. The house no longer creaked. It breathed. Emma now only moved when it let her. She didn't eat, didn't sleep, not like before. The stain was no longer just in the house. It was inside her. 2 months later, a young couple arrived. They'd bought the house at auction, amazed by the price. "Needs a little work," the man joked, stepping inside. The house was oddly still. A warmth filled the air. As the woman entered the dining room, she froze. "What's that on the wall?" she asked. A faint discoloration, barely visible in the light, ran down from the ceiling. The man shrugged. Probably just old paint. And somewhere within the house, something smiled.